Hi everyone, my name is Minima and today I want to talk about books that I'm really excited to read in 2026. I'm excited for this video because normally I read things very haphazardly. So like I'll read a book and then I'll, be wanting similar books and then I'll be Googling similar books. But this year I'm trying to be a lot more intentional, partially because I've already bought most of them, so I don't want to waste my money, but also because yeah, I think I end up spending a lot of time just researching books. So this year, I'm just trying to be better about that. I'm only going to talk about novels. I've actually got a very long list of nonfiction to read, um, but it's just kind of less fun to talk about. But I can make a video on that if people are interested. I've got some stuff for my PhD. I've got things that I've wanted to read for a while in philosophy, but just haven't gone around to. So I'm hoping to do all of that this year. Uh, I'm on a maternity leave, so this is maybe a little bit ambitious because anyone who's been on a maternity leave will know that you're actually usually busier than you are normally, just because babies are their cycles change so rapidly, so you can't really plan in advance very well. But I'm really hoping I can get at least most of these read. I've got, I think, 15 or 16 books, so let's get into it. So my first set of books I want to talk about are Russian. So anyone who knows me knows that I love Russian literature. But what I realized was I've actually not read a lot of breadth. So I think when I was, 16, 17, 18, I ended up reading pretty much anything by Dostoevsky I could get my hands on. I read War and Peace, Anna Karenina. So I read like a lot of the kind of, big names, and there are a lot of big names in Russian literature. But I realized I didn't really read like the whole, I haven't read outside of Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, and I guess I've read Master and Margarita and um, like a few others, a handful of others. I haven't really read that much of Russian literature. So this year I've decided I'm going to read more. So the first book I have is by Ivan Goncharov. Okay, I don't know how to say these people's names. Okay, Ivan Goncharov, and it's called Oblomov. I'm super excited for this book because apparently this was one of Tolstoy's favorite books. So this is essentially a book about a guy who's an aristocrat, and he's just extremely lazy. Like he never gets out of bed. Um, and I've read actually. So anytime before I buy a book, I always read a good chunk of it from the library, just to make sure it's not a waste of time, a waste of money. So it's kind of funny. Like he's very endearing, but he's just extremely lethargic all the time. So it's a book about his life. And yeah, I'm just excited to read it, literally because apparently Tolstoy loved it. So, and I love Tolstoy. So, yeah. The next book I have is Fathers and Sons by Turgenev. This one I'm sure most people have heard of. I actually got the Michael Katz translation. So he calls it Fathers and Children, because I guess the word must be offspring, right? But fathers and offspring sounds weird. So I guess it was translated as Fathers and Sons. So this is a book about two sons who are coming back from, I think, university. They're not like two young men who aren't related, and they're coming back to their two fathers. And it's right after the emancipation of serfs in Russia. So serfs were basically indentured slaves or indentured servants. So they had to work the land, and they were essentially like slaves, more or less. And so this is after their emancipation. And so these young men come back and they're fighting with their fathers a lot because the fathers are not a fan of kind of the liberalization that's going on. And I guess the sons are more a fan of that. So it's like really like a clash of values. It's a really famous book, and I've just never read it. So I'm excited to read this one. I've also got, kind of on a similar theme, Secondhand Time by Svetlana Alexievich. So this is not fiction. This is nonfiction. I've actually read a chunk of it, but I was expecting a baby, and I just kind of put it aside because I was so nauseous all the time, and I couldn't really read anything like that required more attention. And so this book, it's absolutely fantastic. Like, it was so good that I had to take breaks reading it. I don't know if that happens to you when you're enjoying a book so much and you're just so in awe of it that like you have to put it aside and just, absorb it. And so this book is, it's essentially a series of interviews, and she's interviewing the generation of Russians who lived through the fall of the Soviet Union. So she's essentially interviewing them about their values, because it's a very unique generation, right? They're basically living, they were communists, and then they actually see like kind of like the fall of communism. And so there's this sense where all of them are out of sync with reality, because the things they devoted themselves to their whole lives, all of those values have basically been upturned and overturned. And it's just extremely moving, um, just because it repeatedly, you got the sense that they felt like they had been betrayed, right? Because often they would give up, like they didn't accumulate wealth, they didn't accumulate property, right? They were just kind of communists. They lived in a communist society, and now all of a sudden, like they look around them, and the people who kind of had cheated the system under the Soviet Union, they're fine and they're well off, and these people are struggling. Additionally, a lot of them actually believed in like the sense of like, um, everyone's equal and everyone kind of deserves, these goods, even if that means we sacrifice on certain luxuries and certain types of maybe even non-luxuries, but we endure certain hardships. That's worth it in the end. So some of them actually would work for the Soviet Union, the people she's interviewing. But it's also moving because I think everyone, all of us, we live in a really fast changing world. And I think increasingly we're going to get this sense of alienation as we get older, because things are changing so rapidly, that the values we were raised with, the traditions we've held, they're just become totally misaligned with the way things actually are. And it seems like it's out of our control, like maybe certain promises are made and they're not kept, and the sense of betrayal is so deep. Like nowadays, I think in a lot of the Western world, but certainly in Canada, you have the sense that housing was promised to us, like that we would, you know, get a job, get a house, have a family, like a sort of lifestyle was promised, a certain dream, um, and I think we're just feeling this huge sense of betrayal because it's totally inaccessible for probably most young people in Canada, certainly a large number of us. And so I think that this sense that you're staying in one place and things are changing around you is just, it's it's a common experience in general, but I think for us it's going to happen several times in our lifetime. There's a lot of technological changes that happen. A lot of people, we move a lot more, like the professional class moves a lot. And so even maybe the traditions you have in a certain town, you no longer hold on to. And so I think when I was reading this, what was really moving to me was how one of the people she was interviewing had said that she doesn't even recognize her own children because her children are obsessed with like hamburgers and jeans or whatever, like all of these kind of materialistic things that she had not devoted her life to. And the book isn't really about, yearning for the Soviet Union to come back. That's not kind of what the moral of the book is. But I think the moral of the book is about people who are left behind when things are changing. And kind of specifically, it's not just general in that way. I mean, I'm making it general, but it's specifically about kind of Russians and like kind of obviously what are now not Russian states, like Belarus and all those other ones, ex-Soviet states, and how their sense of like kind of the greatness of their peoples is disrupted by where they are now. So I'm excited to finish this. I actually don't know if I'll be able to. Like I said, it was extremely moving, and I kept having to put it aside just to kind of absorb it. But yeah, it's a really good book. There's a book I read last year, which I did not like, and I don't recommend, but there was one section I liked. It was called Exit West by Mohsin Hamid. And it's actually in the top 100 books of the 21st century, the New York Times list. But anyway, I don't agree with it being in that list. So basically, the book is about refugees. And there's a section in the book that's just like a page, and it's about an old woman, and it's just like one little page. The rest of the book is about kind of typical refugees, people we think of as migrants or refugees, right? Who move and who change location geographically, right? They moved from, I don't know, Pakistan to Canada or whatever. Um, but this one page was just about a kind of a regular woman, and she's just living in one place. So she's not moving, but she slowly sees her entire street change. And the people who live there and the types of people who live there, you know, like she used to know all of her neighbors. Now her neighbors are just moving houses every 5, 6 years. You know, the kind of the culture of her neighborhood has changed. And so this book kind of reminds me of that, because the one kind of good idea I got out of the book Exit West, because the rest of it I didn't enjoy, but the one good idea I got out of it was that, you know, you can be a migrant, like an unwilling migrant, even without changing where you are, even without moving. And there's a sense where all of us are just migrants through time. Um, and yeah, I just find that like a very difficult idea to sort of grapple with, because there's this real sense that you have control of your life, right? And so the sense that actually you have no control of the cycles of time it's difficult to really accept. The last in my book of Russian novels that I'm hoping to read this year is Dr. Zhivago by Boris Pasternak, also an extremely famous Russian novel. He won, I think, the Nobel Prize for this, and he wasn't allowed to accept it by the Soviet Union, just because he was not sympathetic to the Soviet Union. So Dr. Zhivago is essentially a love story. There's a very famous movie made about this, and it's actually one of my father's favorite movies. So he's told me to watch it many times, and he's told me to read this book many times. So he'll be happy that I'm finally getting around to it. So Dr. Zhivago is a story about a doctor, clearly, and he falls in love with someone's wife, which is like a big theme in Russian novels, I guess, where they're always falling in love with other people's wives. Yeah, I don't actually know what else happens. A lot of times, like if there's a book I know I've wanted to read, I actually don't look it up on purpose, because I enjoy kind of finding out as I go along. Yeah, but I'm excited to read this set of Russian novels, and the thing I love about Russian novels that I've read, or Russian literature, like Russian short stories, and here I use Russian broadly to include also, you know, like ex-Soviet states, is kind of the way that they're able to, they're like very intense, and they deal with a lot of class issues and a lot of family issues. So I really enjoy when any given issue is explored through the lens of a family. So for example, the issue of class is going to be explored through Fathers and Sons in Fathers and Sons by Ivan Turgenev. And I think that sense that there's these kind of big ideas or big concepts, and then the question of how they touch us on like a personal level is something I'm very fond of reading about. And I particularly enjoy stories about fathers and sons for some reason. Like I read The Death of a Salesman by Arthur Miller last year, which is a play, a very famous play. And it's a similar kind of idea where there's this salesman and his two sons come home, and the salesman has all of these kind of ambitions for his sons, and it's about his disillusionment and their kind of trying to deal with the expectations that he's put on them. But really, the whole thing is about the American dream. And so I really enjoy when people explore ideas in that way. I think because then you can do the same thing in your own life. You know, like it's so hard to step outside of your own life and try to look at how different, I don't know, factors like class, religion, race, just like professionalism, or you know, religion, like how those things are really affecting you and your dynamics, your interpersonal dynamics. But when you see someone else do it, it's a bit easier to try to do it yourself, on yourself. Yeah, I hope that makes sense. Okay, so the next set of books I want to talk about have nothing really linking them except that they're based in Europe. And three of them are kind of set in Italy. So the first book I want to talk about, I'm actually reading, I've read like a chunk of it. It's called The Viceroys by Federico de Roberto. So I've never heard anyone talk about this book, but apparently it's like a really important book in Italy. So it's and so I'm the reason I'm reading it is because I read a book called Leopard by Giuseppe Tomasi di Lampedusa. And it was a fantastic book. Like, it's one of my favorite books of all time. It was just amazing. And so I told my professor, who's Italian, that I really loved that book. And she told me to read this book, and she said it was better. So that's what I'm doing. I'm listening to her. So this is a book. So like I said, I've read a chunk of it. This book is about evil people, okay? There's no other way to describe this. It's like reading about Satan and his cronies, except set in Sicily, and they're people instead of being demons. But they're all demonic, except one. And she's oppressed by all the demonic people. It's just totally, it's so bleak. So essentially, the story is that it's a story about the decline of the aristocracy in Sicily. And so there's a family called the Uzidas or Uzidas. I don't know how you pronounce it. It's spelled Uzedas. But this family, and I'll just call them, I guess, Uzidas. This family is like their mother passes away, and there's a will. And, you know, everyone's kind of waiting with bated breath because very recently, the law which requires that you give all your money to the eldest son has been abandoned, as Italy's kind of moving a little bit more towards liberalism. And so, yeah, I guess it would be called liberalism. I don't know what they call it there, but anyway, in my head it's like they're becoming more liberal. And so this family is kind of waiting with bated breath to see what the will ends up being. So all of the family like runs and, you know, comes to find out what happens with the will. That's how the book starts, and you're introduced to a lot of characters. You're introduced to like the siblings, to the children, and every single one of them. This is really, I think, remarkable. All of them are horrible, horrible, horrendous, evil people in totally different ways, and the only thing that unites them is cunning and malice. But each of them is an individual character. Like none of them are. You would never confuse any of them, and I think that's just extremely remarkable to be able to depict evil in so many varied ways. And it's interesting because some of them they become monks because I guess what they used to do was they wanted to keep the land and the title in the family. And so only the oldest son was allowed to get married, and the other sons basically had to become clergymen or something. They weren't allowed to get married so that they wouldn't have legal children. You know, they could have bastard children, but not legal children. Honestly, I didn't know that before, and it just blows my mind that would be a thing. Like, it's just so terrible to prevent people from getting married. So anyway, they become, you know, there's a monk, the uncle. He's totally like the most vulgar person you could possibly imagine. There's the oldest son who's trained in deceit, and who just is very he really covets wealth, you know, more than he needs. And then there's the youngest son who the mother really liked, and he is at first glance less evil, but what he really is just totally indifferent to anything but his own indulgences. And his wife, like the poor thing, she's so overlooked and oppressed, and he's always cheating on her and treating her poorly. And it's just a real exercise in, honestly, like what can only be called like a type of inferno. And it's set within kind of the overall context is the reunification, or not the reunification, the unification of Sicily and Italy. And so I guess what's similar to The Leopard is basically The Leopard is also set with a similar type of historic background, except in The Leopard, the aristocracy is seen as something that it's in decline, but it's sad. You know, like we should be sad that it's declining. Like there's a certain type of person, a certain type of nobility that's being lost. Whereas with the viceroys, and this was written, by the way, only like 40 years after this decline happened. So this is actually a lot more contemporary than that book, which is a lot more like I think it was written in the 20th century, and he's looking back at what happened in 59, maybe 1850s, 1860s. Whereas this was written in like the 1890s. So I feel like he has a better sense of what the aristocrats really were like. Yeah, for him, it's not that there's anything to mourn that they're gone. They're just so totally self-involved. So they have so much hubris, so much pride, so much greed, like no redeeming characteristic whatsoever. I think if you enjoy reading about really evil people, you should totally read this book. Like I honestly have never read a book with so many different types of evil people in my life. And in that way, it's just fascinating, but it's hard to read a lot of it at once. Like you just need to get away from them. Yeah, so I'm reading this right now, and I think, I mean, it's just the type of book that makes you think, God, I hate rich people. But it's not just rich people, it's specifically aristocrats because they don't like other rich people. They only like people from noble families. And they're just so self-involved. It's really hard to explain how bad these people are. Yeah. Anyway, so that's one of my books. The next is also Italian. It's called Lies and Sorceries by Elsa Morante. Um, I actually read one of her books last year called Arturo's Island. It was my second favorite book I read in 2025. It was just such a beautiful, um, sorrowful coming of age story of a young boy, a teenage boy, who lives on this island with a very neglectful father. But the way it was written was just, it was written with this like beautiful sense of like a fable. It was just so gorgeous. And when I was reading Arturo's Island, I it took me back to when you're a child, and even the really sad, depressing things that happen to you, you kind of create this story that where I don't know, like somehow this event will be given meaning. For example, maybe you're like a prince or princess, and like somehow you're gonna be saved from this, or you're gonna conquer someone, and I think that ability to recreate it, like it took me back to like being a kid in that way. Although his life was significantly worse than mine, but just the sense where you're always like creating. The world is so incomprehensible, and so you're always creating stories to make sense of it. And I honestly had never been taken back to that particular sense of like a fable that you live as a kid, that you're living through some sort of fable, and it was just really amazing. And so I picked up Lies and Sorceries by her, which is about a girl who was adopted, by a fallen woman. Her name's Elisa, and essentially it's, I think, similar, where she's constructing narratives about her family. And yeah, I'm very excited to read this. If I if I ever finish this, to be honest. And the other book I want to talk about is, maybe I'll do this. Actually, no, I'll do Abigail by Magda Szabo. So she's a Hungarian author, and I read her book The Door last year, and it was so good. It was amazing. It was very intense. I love intense writing, So it was, that book was about a woman and her relationship with her housekeeper. And it was there's just a lot in it. And so I picked up this book, which is a coming of age story, also. And this one is about a girl who's sent by her father to like a Calvinist boarding school. And I guess that she's having a tough time of it. The girl's name is Gina. And then there's a kind of statue there called Abigail. I don't know if it's a saint, but there's a statue there. And so she's kind of asks the statue to help her. I haven't looked much more into this book, so I'm very excited for it. I want to keep it kind of in suspense. And yeah, I just love coming of age stories. I think that it's just such a formative time of your life when you're kind of a preteen to teenager, and in your early 20s. And so I think that when you read those, it just allows you to see, as like an older person, kind of the different ways your mind could have settled. Like you've settled on one worldview now that you're past that age, but maybe it could have settled in a different way. And I think that sense of helplessness and like really trying to figure out and assert control in a world that's kind of imposing things on you is, it's I don't want to say it's fun to read, but I feel like it's more true to how life actually is. I think when you get older, maybe your sense of control deepens, especially if you're more financially independent. You're more independent in many different ways, at least in your 30s and 40s. And so I think that it's like more true to our actual existential condition when you read a coming of age story. And then the last book I want to talk about in this kind of section is Memoirs of Hadrian, I'm just so excited about this book. I'm putting it off only because I'm so excited about it. So this is written by a woman who was some sort of scholar on the Roman Empire, and this is about one of the Roman emperors, Hadrian, who preceded Marcus Aurelius, who was the famous Stoic. I'm sure most people have heard of him. So these are imaginary letters that she has him write to Marcus Aurelius, who is his successor. I actually think he wasn't his immediate successor. I think there was someone in between. But anyway, he's writing letters to Marcus Aurelius, and I've heard that it's uh, just like a very good book. So I'm excited to read it. Next set of books I have are from Latin America. So one of them is The Passion According to G.H. I actually have ended up reading two of her books this month, The Hour of the Star and Near to the Wild Heart, just because they popped up on my Libby app, which is it's like a library book app where you can borrow ebooks. And they were just so amazing. I've never read anything like it. It reminded me a little bit of James Joyce, but just very different. Like I think the way Joyce uses language is really remarkable. With her, so far, what I can tell is her writing, it's very intense and it's just there's this real sense of like a life force. And I think with both of her books that I read, of which I preferred The Hour of the Star, by the way, I thought it was a better book. They're both it's like she's tracking like the movement of life in you. Like you know how sometimes you have these moments where you feel like life itself or like I don't know, almost like the universe itself is running through you. And they're just like they're so brief. And I feel like in her novels they're overtaken by that sense. And she's trying to capture it, like what's really essential. I guess she thinks that's what's really essential, like this like vital force in us. And the way she describes it, the way she describes things in general, you would never think to describe things that way. So even though I'm not a fan of experimental novels, I loved both of them. And so yeah, I'm really excited for The Passion According to GH, which I've heard is her masterpiece. So yeah, I don't know how it can get any better. So the other one is Crooked Plow. I actually read this 2 weeks ago. So it's by Itamar Vieira Jr. It's fantastic. It's about so basically it's about two sisters. They're Afro-Brazilians. So I didn't know this. Sort of coincidentally, The Economist had an article. The Economist is a magazine. So The Economist had an article in December about the slave trade in Brazil. And I actually didn't know that apparently 4.5 million Africans were trafficked to Brazil to become slaves. And so the Economist was talking about how nowadays there's like this growing movement, like an awareness of Afro-Brazilians and kind of their contributions and their heritage. And so this is a book that I'm assuming is part of that same movement. So it's about these two Afro-Brazilian sisters, and their father and mother are subsistence farmers, which basically means that you farm people's land for them, you give them all the crops, and then you're allowed to keep a little bit for yourself. And if you get wounded or hurt or disabled in some way and you can no longer farm, then you're just kicked off, because the only reason you're allowed to live there is because you farm the crops. And so you're not allowed to build brick houses, because brick houses would mean that you get to stay there. So all of your houses are built of mud. I don't know. I learned a lot from this novel. It was just so depressing to read about their conditions of life. It's a very like intense novel. The words are almost like branded on your skin. There's a lot of talk about their religion, which is kind of a mix of the indigenous religion and Christianity. But it's really about these two sisters, and it's about the different paths that their lives take, and how both of them kind of live under the shadow of kind of the diamond frenzy that occurred and was occurring in the area. Anyway, it was a fantastic novel. I thought the first 2/3 were just amazing, like perfection. I thought in the last third he does like a gimmick that I didn't like. I think it took away from the novel a little bit. It wasn't bad. It wasn't terrible, and I know some people probably really liked it. But for me, I preferred when he was sticking to like very realistic writing, and this gimmick was sort of not realistic. Not that it was, not that it was like false or something. It was just it wasn't like a very kind of day to day. It was like he went away from observing their life day to day, and he started just kind of grandly painting their life across years, and I didn't enjoy that. even though it made sense with the tool that he was using, with the gimmick or the tool or the writing style he'd chosen to pursue. Anyway, I'm being very vague on purpose because I'm hoping people read this. So my next set of books are Icelandic, Norwegian. They're all quite long, which is, I don't know why so many of them are so long. So the first one is called Independent People by Halldór Laxness. He won a Nobel Prize in Literature, and I think part of it is the reason I want to read this is just I want to kind of try to hit every author who's won a Nobel Prize in Literature. I think I usually like them, so I think it's worthwhile for me to try. So this is a book about a sheep farmer who spent 18 years trying to save up money. He finally bought a plot of land and he wants to be independent, you know. And it's about his relationship with his daughter. This is one of those books which I'm not sure I'm going to enjoy. I tried to read it as an ebook, but it was just clearly, it's so slow and meditative that it just was one of those books you need to have a physical, like you need to be physically handling it, you know. I find that reading on the phone or a Kindle or a Kobo or whatever, reading things that are not as plot driven is just not enjoyable. Like to me, if I have some sort of piece of technology in my hand, I can't focus that much. Like I can't immerse myself in it sufficiently. So that's why I got it. It was maybe a bit of an impulse buy, to be honest. But I have to read it because I purchased it. So yeah. The next one I have is A Death in the Family by Nausgaard. So this, I've never read any books by him. He's really famous. And this is part of his My Struggle series, which is, I want to say 6 books. I think it's 6 books. It's essentially like a memoir of sorts, and so it's very long. The reason I want to read this is because I read one of his essays in the New Yorker last year, and it was about re-enchanting. Was it? Maybe Harper's Magazine. Anyway, in one of those kind of, you know, magazines. And it was about re-enchanting the modern world. And he made this observation that I just thought was so insightful that it made me want to read his books. So the observation was that for him, technology is like magic. And it's because he doesn't know how it works and he just fully trusts it. And I just thought, as someone who also doesn't have any engineering background, to me, it's also like magic. Like most of the things I deal with on a daily basis, like my phone, my computer, I don't know, there's just so many of them. You spend so much time on your phone. Like I actually have no idea how it works. And I think that idea that maybe the way our world is enchanted is through all of these tools that we use, where there's no, you know, they're beyond the mechanical, and there's this sense where we just rely on them and trust that they're going to work. And I think like in the age of LLMs, like large language models, we're going to increasingly see maybe people feeling that they're almost like they have psyches and that they're somehow maybe even demigods. I don't know, like some sort of sense where it's like greater than just a human power. I feel that way about technology sometimes. I actually feel that way about a lot of things because I have no mechanical sense whatsoever. Like once my husband tried to explain to me how a car works, and I was just like, I don't understand. But I can figure out how a car works. But like if you give me even something more complex like an airplane, I'm just always in awe that it actually flies, you know. And so I think there's just, unless you're an engineer, there are a lot of things in your daily life which are so mysterious. Anyway, I like that observation, so I picked up his book. And then the last one is a really famous one actually, but I've never read it, or to be honest, I hadn't heard of it until last year. It's called Kristen Lavransdatter, which is like a name. And it's a book that's about a girl who's sent to a convent school, and then she leaves and she has, I want to say, illicit relations. Like basically she's not married, if I'm not mistaken. No, she does get married. Okay. But basically she marries someone against her father's will. And as you can see, it's quite long. The reason I want to read this is because someone I really respect and admire recommended this as a very great work of spirituality. And I just thought, okay, like, why not give it a go, you know? Yeah, so this is actually one of the books I'm most excited about reading. I'm kind of saving it for, you know, when I have a lull. And the last set of novels I have are all united by virtue of being by Americans. So the first one is Marilynne Robinson's Lila. So this is part of her Gilead Quartet, which you can read individually. They're completely independent, even though they're all about the same basic events. I read Home, which is the second one last year, and I thought it was really amazing. It wasn't as good as Gilead. What I really like about Marilyn Robinson is that she makes piety a virtue, and not just a simple virtue. Like for her, it's simplicity, but it's a complex virtue. You know, like it's almost like almost to a fault. She thinks it's like a thinking man's virtue, um, a thinking person's virtue. Uh, and I just think that it's so rare to encounter someone kind of in the contemporary scene who really truly is a believer of some sort. And so it's, to me, like the way she's thought about it, her musings are just really profound. Um, I think if I were to have one criticism of her, I think she writes in a way that's like quite slow. I watched an interview of her and she speaks slowly, she talks slowly, like a bit meandering, very considered. You know, every word is chosen very carefully. And I guess it's a good thing for a writer to do that. But I think because for me, I like things to be fast. Sometimes I just think like, okay, like get on with it, like, some people have hurried lives. Like, can't you write about hurried people? um, yeah, and yeah, but I think to be honest, it's probably good for me. It's a good exercise in patience to be forced to slow down and kind of think at the not think, but uh, stop, but like kind of stop and read at the pace that she wants me to read. So anyway, I'm really excited about this novel because I just love her. The next one is Crossing to Safety by Wallace Stegner. So this book was recommended by someone who said it's similar to Stoner by John Williams, which I absolutely love. And that's literally all I know about this book. And it was on sale. It was at a used bookstore. And so I just thought, you know what, let's just pick it up. I mean, if it's like Stoner, I'll be really happy I purchased it. So unfortunately, I can't tell you anything else about it. It's established itself as one of the greatest and most cherished American novels of the 20th century, tracing the lives, loves, and aspirations of two couples who move between Vermont and Wisconsin. It is a work of quiet majesty, deep compassion, and powerful insight into the alchemy of friendship and marriage. Okay, so basically, it's about two couples, and then the rest of it's just like, the fluff that literary people like to say. That doesn't tell you anything. Yeah, but to be honest, I'm actually quite excited about it. Several people have not told me, but I've read several people say that this is similar to Stoner, so I'm really excited. And then the last book I have is by William Faulkner, Absalom, Absalom. I've actually never read anything by William Faulkner, and the reason is that I've always been worried that my lack of biblical knowledge will hinder me from appreciating his work. But so many people have recommended him to me at this point, and I just thought, you know what, like, let's just go for it. Like, what's the worst that can happen? I chose Absalom, Absalom, literally just because I like the name. Um, that was that was it. If I like it, I'm gonna read The Sound and the Fury next. And yeah, I am excited for it because he's just one of those names that you've heard are so great. Um, and in my experience, when everyone says a book is great, it's usually great. Like, when it's been on, reading lists for, decades, there's probably a reason why. So I'm really excited about this. Yeah, so that's it from me for my novels that I want to read in 2026. Yeah, let me know if you've read any of them and what you thought, or what your reading list is for this year. Are any of these books on it? Yeah, and thank you for watching. Have a great day.